We need to trade off USBs, is that right?
Right. Laptops.
Oh, laptops.
You know, if you promise you won't take more than 5 minutes, there are cookies over there.
5 tops.
Couldn't get it.
Yeah, and my flash drive.
I'm a retired school teacher.
You and I, we know how to
Very good. Yeah.
I had the Oh yeah, Monument Valley. John Wayne. Ah. I believe it. Yeah, well, it's great. And of course, he made most of the Monument Valley. I think he made all the Monument Valley movies with John Ford. And it's the same topic. Really. Yes. Yes. That's right. He was one of the 4 big directors who went to war.
I was just read a book about it. I did not always heard about it. I didn't realize it.
Right. It is.
Yeah, it was an island. It was kind of neat.
Sheldon, how are you, my friend? It's been too long. Is that the reservation in Arizona? I've been on that reservation several times. And I grew up in Phoenix. My high school was the Indian high school, as they call it. I think it's still there. I'm not sure. Where they would bring in Navajo and Pima from their reservations during the school year, and they had boarding, and they would go to high school. Yeah. The highest per capita income. I think it's still the highest per capita income. I was Scottsdale, Navajo. So that's very good work to be doing. Education so long. Oh, good. Gotcha. You women are ready to, Oh, yeah. First thing we'll do is outdoor any cell phone sex. I understand that. I feel that way too myself. All right, everybody, if you'd like to grab your cookies and take a seat, I think Nan is about ready. What do you call this? It's not bad.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Very good.
Hi, my name is Nan Jones, and I really don't need a microphone. I'm a retired school teacher. I taught high school for years. This particular one is on D-Day. My dad was very similar to the Navajo Code Talkers. His job in D-Day and in Okinawa was a naval gunfire liaison officer. He went in early and he radioed back the position of the enemy emplacements or whatever, bunkers, to the naval ships for them to fire and not hit their own men. So that's what I'm going to talk about, particularly D-Day. If you have an opportunity at the end, this is an original D-Day map. It's the one that my dad took in with him. D-Day minus 30 minutes. That means 7 a.m. It is in mint condition. We have no idea how we got it in there. It is paper. It is not silk. And typical, he didn't talk about it. I asked him if anybody got sick, if he got sick when they landed because the weather was terrible. He said lots of people did. Okay, and show them the other side.
Yeah, I love this.
On the back side are the tides, currents, beach gradations, and the moon and the sunlight tables. That's why it's double framed.
Well done.
And there's only like a couple holes in it. Yeah.
So you're a little closer to the camera. No, move.
And over here on the table is National Geographic magazine. I had given my students in geography an assignment, and this kid came up and he said, "Hey, Miss Jones, look at this great D-Day map." It's the same map. Okay, all right, here we go. We're going to see D-Day through the eyes of my dad, Curtis Charles Norbeck, United States Naval Reserve. And that's one of the many pictures. He was with the 6th Regiment. If you put that into frame, Robert Kappa, the photographer, was assigned to my dad's unit.
Wow.
So every time I see one of those pictures, of course they've got the helmet on it, I think, oh, I wonder if that's my dad. There he is, fresh out of Penn State, went to Notre Dame for training. He was a Naval Gunfire Liaison Officer attached to the United States Army. In the Pacific, he was attached to the 6th Marine Division. He never served with the Navy because he had different ones. And he landed on Omaha Beach, the least successful. The Navy operation was called Operation Neptune. He was with the 11th 5th Amphibious Force, the 1st Division of the United States Army, with the big red one, 16th Regiment and 2nd Battalion. D-Day does not stand for Doomsday, folks. It stands for day. Rather than go back and change all their documents, because they had a window from May to June based on the tides and the moon and all that stuff. And rather than go back and change every single day, just put D. So D-Day minus +1 is June 7th. The other thing is, of course, it wasn't scheduled for June 5th, but the weather was really, really bad. And June 6th, it wasn't a whole lot better. You have to think about this, and I didn't realize until I started studying it. They wanted to pick that because it left them enough good weather to get to Germany. If anybody knows anything about the Battle of Bulge, this captivated a little because that was pretty bad as far as weather-wise. His uncle served in the United States in World War I as part of the Canadian Expeditionary Force. He was Swedish, but he was from Pennsylvania, but he was farming in North Dakota, so he went up there. All of them have ties to the military. My father had 4 sisters. The oldest one married a United States Army sergeant. My dad was the second one, and he served until 1956 in the reserves. Marie, his sister, was an Army nurse. She's buried in the Punch Bowl in Hawaii. Why? I don't know. And she married a career. He was Army Air Corps, and served in Vietnam and was a retired lieutenant colonel. And then the youngest one, who is still alive, her husband was a Navy veteran. Plus, my dad's uncle served in World War II also, because he wasn't that much older than he was. He was the youngest of. And here's the picture. My dad had 2 blonde-headed sisters, 1 red-headed and 1 brown-headed, and he had dark brown hair. Okay, here's the family history. My dad died at 54 with part of the shrapnel still in him. His sisters lived to be 99, 11 months, and 3 days. Her younger sister said she was too mean to die. She was a really strong-willed woman. And June is still alive. She turned 90 this month. This is the Penn State group at Notre Dame, the Naval Officer Training class. He started there on May 31st. Graduated from Penn State. Here's his various assignments. He went to Solomon, Maryland for amphibious training, and then to Little Creek for more amphibious training, then to Long Island, and also, I think, to practice the invasion and that type of stuff, because I know that my parents spent New Year's Eve in Times Square. And then he was sent out from New York on January 1st and went to Dartmouth, England. The original name was Roundup, but they called it Operation Overlord. Took me forever. I always want to say Overload, but... And Operation Neptune was the naval support of that particular group. The Navy, all along, whether it's Utah or Omaha, went in early, and their job was to radio back, as I said, to the ships. The invasion fleet, of course, was the largest, and still is, invasion of naval vessels, almost 7,000. It's just amazing. They managed to surprise the Germans with that many people. They wanted it for several reasons. One was to get another front against Hitler's Fortress Europa they had Africa, and they did invasion because of Europe, of Italy, because Mussolini was considered the weakest of the commanders. But part of it was that they wanted to have support of Stalin, so the East-West pincer movement can exist. All right. Okay. All right. And my mouse just stopped, but that's okay. I can do that. How did they manage to pull off that big surprise? The Germans thought it was going to be the Calais route because that was the shortest route. That made sense. That's why you don't do it. And they also knew that the Allies needed a port to bring in all the equipment, support, and weapons and vehicles to support the invasion. They never believed that we actually would build our own port, and we did. So how did we plan all that? Well, it was called Operation Bodyguard, and the planning in England was the Operation Fortitude North and South. They had a commando unit that actually landed near Calais. Patton was seen up in the Dover area. They had fake equipments and camps. They had parachutes with fake dummies that were dropped in the Calais area, but they self-destructed upon landing so that they couldn't tell if they were real or not. Here's one of the pictures. They built plywood camps near the Dover crossing. They had rubber inflated tanks. They even played the sounds of reveille and taps and all that kind of stuff. So the Germans were so convinced there was no invasion coming soon that Rommel did go back to Germany to help celebrate his wife's birthday. And yes, he did take a pair of shoes from Paris for her. And several of the officers went to Paris on leave. German tanks were assembled up in the Calais area, but couldn't move the tanks unless Hitler approved. And you can't wake him up. You know, he doesn't like that. Okay, so here's a wooden plane, but you've got to realize what this looked like from the air. Here is a inflatable plane. Here is a tank being carried by a bunch of guys. And there was a tank, 4 people, that's all. Another fake tank and a fake truck. And they even had fake landing craft in the river by Dover. They didn't like this one. It had 1,000 pieces to put it together. But, you know, they thought of everything. Also, the day of the invasion, the Royal Air Force dropped lots of aluminum stuff over Calais to simulate other actions. And his role in D-Day, he landed in D-Day minus 30 minutes, so it's 7 a.m. The left side of Omaha Beach, easy red. The Coqueville-sur-Mar, which is South Sea area. Now, the reason you spread it out over 60 miles is if one section's not successful, then you do have 4 more. You never want to put all your eggs in one basket. And see, the Germans never really thought that they would use that particular thing because it was so spread out. And there were five beaches, 2 United States, Utah and Omaha, then 2 British and the Canadian. And you can see where they are located in that area. If any of you have toured it, we had a good time. We did not go on the 75th anniversary. We went the next year. The 26th Division of the Army was assigned to Utah Beach, and one of the guys talked about the Rangers really did climb up these cliffs, and I was sitting there looking, going, "You're kidding me! Under fire, amazing." The 1st Division, that's the United States Red 1, Army 1, was assigned to Omaha Beach, and the 116th Regiment got the western portion, and my dad's regiment got the eastern portion, the 16th. This is from the map room at Southwick. We went on the tour in 2015 through the Stephen Ambrose Company. The guy right there, Captain, he was a Marine, Captain Ron Drez. He was the researcher for the book The Band of Brothers. And he did a lot of the tours under Stephen Ambrose, and he took some of the veterans back with him. He interviewed all these, it was amazing, amazing fount of knowledge. I'm a history buff, and I was taking notes. I gave up. I couldn't keep up with him. He had so many wonderful stories. These are our pictures. And there's the plan. Now, they all met out in the center. It's Piccadilly Circus. The circus in England is a circle. And then they went to their appointed areas. And that's the symbol for the United States Army and the 6th Regiment. Now, this is the ship that my father sailed on from England to Omaha Beach, to Henrico. Now, I ordered my dad's records, 178 pages I had to pay for, that were not in chronological order. They are now. And nowhere in any of that, now my dad was in the Navy, does it mention a single ship. I was like, come on, how did he get from New York to London, to England? How did he get back? There's a book over there. I found it in a French museum shop. It's in English. And it had the ship and the regiment and the division. I was like, yes! Finally. I mean, I said to somebody at Ollie, and I said, you're military, how come they didn't put in their ships in there? He said, I don't know. D-Day numbers. I'm not going to read them because you can read. There's an amazing number of individuals and a tremendous, of course, loss of life. Here's an interesting thing. These are the groups of the countries that fought in there. See anything that surprises you, maybe? Czechoslovakia. And well, I know that the New Zealand and Australian people fought together. They did that in World War I also. These were the less than successful inflatable tanks. Now, these are real tanks, and they wanted to get them to shore, and that canvas thing was to go around it and hopefully keep it above water. It didn't work a whole lot. And of course, tanks are notoriously heavy. And this is a Higgins boat made in New Orleans, and which is why the D-Day Museum is in New Orleans. And it's basically an old swamp boat with no bottom. And we'll see later why that was really important. This is the 6th Marine Division, 6th Division, 16th Regiment, and those metal things that look like cross V's, those are called hedgehogs, and they were, with mines, of course, they were designed to rip out the bottom of the boats, but if you've got a Higgins boat, they sailed right over them, which was good. And this is some of the landing. Every time I see one of those, I think, it could be my dad, but I mean, they all had helmets on. He wasn't any taller than anybody else. So. All right. This was why Omaha Beach was such a problem. They had a lot of strong tides, 5-10 miles an hour, and it made it very difficult for landing. So here is the next map. The red arrows are where they actually landed. We're talking absolute total chaos. So you got the guy, in my dad's case, with the radio. He lost it in the surf. You got one with the battery pack, and they don't know where he is because all of them landed off kilter. Created chaos. They had problems finding the right, unit, and so on. So, problems on Omaha. 2 of the 12 boats actually landed where they were supposed to. 8 of the 12 surgical teams made it ashore, but none of their operating equipment did. Currents were at least 5 miles per hour, and then the tides caused waves that covered the German fortifications, and by 9:30, the tide had come in and all the fortifications were covered. So, Omaha Beach, Charlie, Dog, Easy, and Fox. And Easy was the section my dad was in, and he was in the red section. And this is, of course, after. Why do I know that? Because there's so many of them right there. This is the National Geographic that I have over there in 2002 in June. And one of my students, they were doing an exercise in geography on National Geographics. He came up and said, "Hey, Miss Jones, this is really a cool map." And I went, "Oh, it's my dad's map." So I learned a lot of the things there. Okay, this is from the section at the bottom. And it says top secret bigot. Bigot means to Gibraltar backwards. They used it during Operation Torch, which was the invasion of North Africa. And that is the security clearance above top secret. This is the picture of the map that Jim showed you. It's the actual picture of it. I was telling some of the ladies, when I took it apart and had it double matted, double framed, I wanted to make a copy for my grandkids so they could take it to school when they studied that part of history. And my granddaughter just used it in the spring this year. And so they said, "Well, you can run it through a scanner." I said, "No, it's 70 some years old. I'm not doing." So I asked an architect at church, and he said, "Oh, you just take a picture of it." I said, "No. You have to stand up on it." I said, "No." I finally found somebody at Clemson, and they had a big scanner, and they did it for me for free. I went through the library. I have a friend that was there. So on the front, in the bottom, you'll look it over here. In the bottom in red, in the water, are all the German fortifications. And over there on the right-hand side, you have all of the legend that tells you what kinds of fortifications they are. And then, of course, they have the geographic features. Then on the back, and I know it's upside down, but it's upside down on here. It has the sunlight tables, the moonlight tables, the beach gradations, the titles, and the currents, all on the other side of the map. So you had both of it. I've already said that they used that in 1942. I also, in the National Geographic, there were only 200 of those issued in 1944. And I have one. And it's in really good shape. I have no idea how he got it ashore. He never talked about that. Now, how do they create that? Well, they also, it said if you were cleared through that top security clearance, above top secret, you were bigoted. But they did it in cocoons of secrecy for obvious reasons. So the Navy frogmen did the samples of the water on the beach and then in the water. The French patriots and laborers gave them information on the fortifications. They actually used old photographs and old postcards. You know, the postcards you buy of, the great place that you stayed in the Appalachians or whatever. They used those. So they could use that, figure out all the different areas. And this is a view from the landing craft. Timeline on D-Day. The 82nd and the 11th Divisions landed at midnight at Utah at 12:16. 12:16, they're very military. All the ships, 5,000 ships left and 800 planes left from England. Paratroopers flew to Utah Beach. 2 a.m. minesweepers were in Utah. 5:50 Navy ships began firing on the Germans. 6 a.m. landing craft started ashore. 6:30 they started on Omaha Beach. And this is a picture from Utah Beach. When we toured with the Stephen Ambrose Company, we went there early so we could see what it was like during that time period, because the tides were out, and I was like, that's a long way to go under German fire with all this stuff that you got to carry with you. This is one of the pictures on Omaha Beach and what they look like. And again, we went to Omaha Beach at the same time of day the next day. This is some of Robert Capa's photographs from D-Day. You know the story. He was a famous photographer, and he was embedded with my dad's group. And he took the films back to England and said, develop them right away. And the guy was in such a hurry to have them dry, he burned almost all of them. So there are very, very few left. That is a great loss. This is the Cokeville section where my dad was. This is the Pointe du Hoc. And that's what it looked like after we got done shelling it. And this is Omaha Beach in 2015. I'm standing partway up, and we are early in the morning again, and you look at how far out the ocean is, or the English Channel is. And it just died. It's okay. And then this is, I'm standing halfway, and that's up the top. Behind that pillar is the cemetery. And like I said, you saw the view down. Bob went, bless my husband, he went all the way down and got me some sand out of it. And this is what his picture he took when he was up. I said, the original caption said, another Norbeck on Omaha Beach. And it was very, very windy that day. It would be officially a no-drop day. In other words, no parachuting at all. I have on multiple layers. It was in June. This is the sections, and Easy Red is where my dad was. And you see the natural draws or passes or through the hills. Omaha Beach was the widest of all of them. It was 7,000 yards long, a gentle slope with bluffs at either end. There were 3 natural draws, and the seawall was anywhere from 4 to 12 feet high with mines. This is the landing. First Army Corps were to secure the beachhead, and they led the charge. Now, the naval support was the fire support included naval gunfire from battleships, cruisers, destroyers that were offshore. The Texas and the Arkansas had the 2 of the largest guns. My dad fired, that's with his woe, yeah, I know, fired the Texas. This was the headquarters of Rommel. We actually stayed at a motel like that, and we ate meals there. Speak wrong here. The different fortifications, hedgehogs are the ones that are like this. Rommel's asparagus are long poles. I'm sure he did not name them that. We did. And they were to, they had mines on them. Then they had the bunkers and gunfire emplacements. And Belgian gates. In order for them not to know exactly where we were going to land, they fired all across the Normandy shores. So the Navy did. These are the bunkers. Too bad. There's a wonderful story about that one, but I have shed 2 layers at this point. I'm down to 2 more. This is our picture of from a bunker. Machine guns. Now, that's a hedgehog. There are mines attached to it. The bunkers, and there's another hedgehog. They're metal. That's all right, here, this is a really, really good map. It shows you all the different kinds. Now, the Belgian gates were 5 feet high. They were metal. It looked like a gate, and they, of course, were full of mines. You went through that first, then the hedgehogs, then the asparagus, Rommel's asparagus. Then you got on the shore, they were mined. There were 5 million mines there. Okay. They landed between the two draws, 64 and 65. They had anticipated that they would land at least 2,400 tons of supplies, only 100. This is what it looked like. And I had to put that in there because they're crawling down and the ship's going like this. That my dad's on the Henrico. And that's what it looked like when they got there. And that's on the landing craft. That's when I said to my dad, "Did you get sick?" And he said, "Lots of people did." He didn't answer my question. Okay. I have a lot of quotes in here. Those are Rommel asparagus. Those are on the beach. And they had mines. And my dad's job was to fire the Texas. And that is the Texas. This is an aerial view. Can you imagine what the Germans thought when they looked out there and went, oh, yeah, wow, a lot of ships. The second wave at 7 a.m. encountered the same problems with the first wave again. Little progress was made. The landings were so far away from where they were supposed to be. Organization was poor. Men lost a lot of their supplies. This is my dad's first-hand account, and I have it over here, handwritten and then typed. It probably took him 4 hours to type. He didn't type worth a hoot. But he said, landed on the left side of Easy Beach, Omaha at 700 hours, anyway. Set up one radio, 609, and it didn't work. And they finally got it to work a little. And then he had 4 wounded in his group and 3 in the other one. They lost part of the one radio in the beach in the surf, and they couldn't find the guy that had the battery pack. So they contacted the forward group and they worked together. Then he went to the Army Signal Corps and said, "Can you give me some parts? Something that works." So he had 7 men wounded. I do not know how large the group was. He recommended that they have more than one person that could use the code because he was, I think, the only one, and he had to leave. Stands for Signal Corps Radios. Okay. Now, on the beach, my dad had shrapnel in his arm. There's a piece of shrapnel over, where's my, down there. They evacuated him to a medical LST, and they put the walking wounded away from the shore, and the wounded, severely wounded, right up, because the German would be very difficult for them to shell right there. So they lobbed the shell over the boat. It blew up, got shrapnel in this leg, blew a hole in this leg, and killed the guy next to him. The hole in this leg was 30% disability. I was telling someone, they didn't put him under, they just gave him a shot and sewed it up. They didn't do skin graft, the scar was this big. And when he was tired or the weather was bad, it would draw up and he would really limp. But it didn't stop them to. All right, now we'll go on to the telegram that my mother got. The date is June 18th, 12 days after the invasion. 12 days, and she knows what he went over there to do. By the way, my birthday is July the 3rd, 1944. She was 8 months pregnant. So this is the first line of missing in action, POW, killed or wounded. The United States Navy Department deeply regrets to inform you that you don't want to read the rest of it. I said, going to work on their people skills here. And then it says he was wounded. They don't tell her how much, what those wounds are. She doesn't know if he has legs, arms, his brain injury, any of that. Then it says, the last line says, do not divulge his ship or duty station to the enemy. I felt like saying, I think Hitler figured out what happened. She was staying with her mother, and everybody had gone somewhere else, and the telegraph guy walks up. She's sitting on the porch by herself. She knows that there's no happy birthday telegrams back then. So she knew it wasn't good. And then I have an actual copy of the original. I have the original telegram and the blurred marks. She's crying so hard she couldn't read it. Okay. That's the Purple Heart. Does anybody know what that section in the middle is? That's an oak leaf cluster. When you are on your ribbons, and it's down here on the thing, if you get more than one Purple Heart, they don't give you another ribbon, they just give you an oak leaf cluster. Because he was wounded on the beach and in the water, he got 2 Purple Hearts. And then that one is the European campaign. And then he got, this is the telegram finally that my dad got to tell him that I had been born. It's dated July the 12th. I was born the 3rd. He got a Bronze Star. And basically, the Bronze Star became because he had his group so organized that when he left, they could carry on. And they didn't catch up with him and give him the Purple Heart until November. He's in San Diego getting ready to ship out. Well, out of San Francisco. Okay. She's back there going like this. I love this quote. This came out of one of the books I have. It says, as if the cities of Green Bay, Racine, and Kenosha, Wisconsin were picked up and moved, every man, woman, and child, every truck and automobile to the east side of Michigan in one night under gunfire. The logistics were mind-boggling. And Churchill said, it was just amazing. But what he also said, Churchill said was, it was the men on the ground that carried it all out. This was something that my dad did not know about. They suspended all reinforcements to Omaha Beach after 3 hours because they made so little progress. They even considered not sending any additional troops in, but they couldn't figure out how to evacuate them, and they couldn't leave them there. My dad did not know that till he saw the movie The Longest Day. Needless to say, he was glad he didn't know it then, or even later. Just, yeah. And this is Bradley. Okay. 5 million mines. It took them 4 days to remove all the bodies from the beaches and the water. This is the cemetery at the top of the hill. Okay, and then I'll stop with this one. This is what's called a mulberry. I didn't know what a mulberry was until a friend of mine, Miles Standish, had oddly said, Nan, you are going to include mulberries in there. I said, oh yeah, sure. They were, we built our own port. We built our own road out in the water. And you see the Red Cross trucks going ashore. The pontoons were called beetles. The roadway was called whales. And they created 6 miles of roads to unload over 7,000 tons of vehicles per day. This is what the Germans didn't realize we could do. They thought we would have to have a port. We built our own port, as did the British. And they were completely operational within 12 days. But then they had a storm. English Channel, so they combined the two, and that's a picture from ours. Okay, I'm gonna. You have time to do anything?
Well,
I got a little bit more. Okay.
go ahead and finish up.
Okay. After receiving the wounds in England. Now, he did not come back to the United States on survivor's leave till August. How do I know all this? Because I have a military compensation that the Pennsylvania Archives still had that my dad filled out. And when I was up there for a presentation, the guy said, "Oh, we have all the ports, all the forts and stations." I said, "Oh, great! I can find out where he was." And Navy has ships, and they didn't put any of them in. But I can tell you exactly when he left England, August 15th. Came back on survivor's leave. Then he goes to San Diego. Then I did find the orders for him to go to San Francisco. This, I was telling somebody, this is what it said. Lieutenant J.G., junior grade, Norbeck was sent to San Francisco to disembark or leave for no named area. So, and they didn't even say the Pacific. They just said no name. So, then he was involved in the landing in Okinawa. And according to him, he spent 88 days in one foxhole. Well, Memorial Day had a free military record search, so I spent all day looking at it. And I finally dug out his maps, which are not in pristine condition, I might add. And these are all the places. He was 88 days, which, as Jim said, is the entire Okinawa campaign. These are all the places he had maps for. So he made it for that 88 days, but not in a foxhole, in foxholes. And he did the same thing. The whole time he was there, he radioed back for, the defense. And, when I said, what was it like? He said, well, I don't like pineapple or Spam. I said, that's all he ate for 88 days. And I said, pineapple's good. He said, no. Because the taste and the smell brought back the memories. And then he was set to invade Japan, and I have the original over there on the table where the two microphones that don't work are. I have the original for him to occupy a naval base in Japan. All right.
Yokosuka Naval Base area is where
Right.
her father is going to occupy.
So,
This, by the way, is priceless.
Yeah, oh yeah. That's an original. And one of my students said, "Ow, we weren't going to invade Japan." I said, "Yes, we were." I happen to have proof. This is the occupation medal for Japan, or for Asia. He was attached to the 6th Marine Division. The 6th Marine Division was the only one established overseas and disbanded overseas. It was in the Pacific. It was never part of the United States group. Again, he was attached to the Marines, attached to the Army the first time. And they got a presidential citation for their efforts. But there is, Jerry Dyer and I spent 25 minutes finding a medal for it. There isn't one. He served active duty 3 years, 3 months, and 3 days. And I have these down here. One of them is a discharge. He mustered out at Philadelphia Naval Yard because he was from Pennsylvania. And this is an honorable discharge pin. It says United States Navy in the front at the top. I didn't discover that until my granddaughter said, "Oh, what's that say, Mimi?" I said, "Oh." And they wore that on their uniform so that they weren't arrested for AWOL. And the next one, I don't know what the official name is, but the guys in the service called it the ruptured duck. It's actually an eagle with a wreath, but they called it the ruptured duck pin. And that meant an honorable discharge also. 30 months and domestic service, and that is an American, it's down there, red, white, and blue medal. That includes the time that he was in training in the United States, 11 months and 17 days. Foreign service, 19 months and 26 days. Yeah, there you go.
Lots of medals for valor, heroism,
Yeah,
and more.
and wounds.
And wounds.
Sure was. And the
sand at the bottom was, we got there when we were in 2015. All right, he retired, he was a lieutenant, junior grade, by October 44. Full lieutenant, 49, retired in 59. And that's his tombstone.
Do people call him Curtis or Kurt?
Kurt. Yeah.
Kurt.
Yeah. This one, when my mother died, he's buried in a military cemetery in Raleigh, and when she died, you can have them both buried at the same place. So when I called the guy about it, he said, "Wasn't your dad in World War II?" And I said, "Yeah." "Did he win any medals?" I said, "Yeah." "He's winning on the tombstone." I said, "I don't know." He died suddenly at 54. We were all in a state of shock, and I was pregnant. And so when we put it back, it says United States Curtis Norbeck, Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy, World War II, Korea, his birth date, and then it says BSM Bronze Service Medal and Purple Heart are on there.
He was also in Korea.
He was in the reserves in Korea, but that was mostly land, so didn't have a whole lot of need for him. Okay, for those of you that remember it, I was on the front page of the Seneca Journal, and the 75th anniversary, and I didn't know he was going to put it on the front page. So he called me. I was working at church, and he said, "Your husband just said, that you know." He called Jerry Dyer. Jerry said, "Oh, Nan." I said, "Today's the 5th." He said, "Yes, I know." So I dashed home, and Bob and I got all the stuff ready, and he came over and they took pictures, and he wrote the article, appeared in the paper the next day. And the back has a picture of the map, the rest of the map. And there are copies over there. That's it. This is a victory medal, and everybody got that. Everybody. Lady Liberty, I assume. There you go. Sorry.
No, no.
Do I have any questions?
Questions for Nan?
Yes, sir.
Last month we went down to the World War II Museum against one Hall. My
In Louisiana?
Yeah, New Orleans, yeah. My brother-in-law is West Point. We went with a bunch of West Point grads for about 5 days. And preparatory to that, my brother-in-law's church, his father-in-law, my wife's father's military record, we knew he'd been in the Battle of Bulge. We found out last month he also landed on the 6th D-Day.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Ooh.
My father-in-law.
Ooh. I was going, ooh.
He
Wow.
would never say anything.
They didn't talk about it.
Yeah, and he had the most horrible dreams. He was actually institutionalized for a while.
Yeah. Anybody else have any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Nan, you may have said something. How did your husband end up getting, your father end up getting one of the 200 maps?
Because that was his job, to radio back.
Okay. That's why he was.
Yep. He was a Naval Gunfire Liaison Officer. That's why I have all the maps of Okinawa. That was his job, to look at the map and tell him the coordinates and have and he says in his letter, that's the only reason I know a lot of that, because he wrote this report. It says, "I fired the Texas," which meant he was calling back to the Texas. And they had some of the bigger guns. But yes, and the map is in mint condition. I cannot believe we talked about it. It's paper and it's not silk, and it is survived. One story I'll tell and then I'll leave. I taught school at Seneca High School for 23 years. I taught history. And I have a relative that was involved in the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. He held a horse for Booth. And so when I got to this, I whipped this out, and one of my students said, "Are you related to everybody?" That's before I found out my great-grandmother sailed on the Lusitania.
So you say he held a horse for John Wilkes Booth?
Yes, he did. He said he was just doing it for a friend. Except he tried to cover up where his friend went.
Yeah.
He spent some time in the dry dock I was telling him in the family history book, he's known as Ned the Traitor. Okay.
Thank you very much. Well, maybe. Okay. Let's again give a nice round of applause to Paul and Nan. Both are excellent. And, we want to keep encouraging this, by the way. If you remember the wonderful, I still get chills think about the wonderful presentation we had about Pearl Harbor. Remember that? Standing on the hills, with the mother watching the Zeros coming over. I'm going to condense my hour presentation into 15 minutes. Actually, I'm not even going to try. But let me just make a couple of comments. We won't even put up the slides. We'll wait for next time. But a couple of quick comments. One, I hope you realize that can you hear me all right?
Oh, yeah.
I hope you realize that the History Club is ripped from the headlines. Did anybody see the CBS Sunday Morning News posted by Jane Pauley on Memorial Day weekend? If you did, you would have seen about a 15-minute segment, an interview with Herschel Woody Williams, the man we talked about last time on our last Zoom meeting, the man who is the last living Medal of Honor winner from the entire Pacific Theater. And he was on Iwo Jima. I showed you the photographs of Woody today. He's 96, I believe. Still very, very sharp. And also showed you the flamethrower he had on Iwo Jima. Well, because we talked about him in the History Club, CBS said we have to do something. And so they interviewed Woody and did a segment, and they even used most of the same photographs that I had used without permission. But I just thought that was great that he got featured. And I thought, well, all of you who were on that Zoom meeting, you don't need this. You're way ahead of this. The second thing, as listening to Paul and the Navajo Code Talkers, how many people know who Ernie Pyle was? I would think, yeah, that's kind of what I would think. By the way, as I was preparing, there's a famous Charles Schulz Peanuts cartoon, and I think he probably wrote it in the 70s. And he said, well, it's Snoopy. And he's saying, I think I'm going to go down and quaff some root beers and talk to the men and, hang out with Ernie Pyle. And the next frame, Charlie Brown looks blank. And then Snoopy says, you don't know who Ernie Pyle is? And then the last panel is, there's something wrong with America. Ernie Pyle was, you'll see the connection here in a moment. Ernie Pyle was maybe the most famous war journalist of the Second World War. He was in Europe, he was at Normandy, he was in North Africa, he was in Tunisia, North Africa, and Libya. And after the considerable time with Easy Company, after the Normandy invasion, he then went to the Pacific and covered the campaign in Iwo Jima and Okinawa. In fact, he wrote his wife and said, anybody who's come back from the war, meaning Europe, and is now going back to the war must be an idiot, referring to himself. He was also known as the GI's favorite war correspondent. He wrote a column. A column is sort of not even, they're more like essays. But he wrote lengthy columns covering the war firsthand, and they were published 6 times a week. First Scripps Hour newspaper, and then they were so widely popular. They were in the Stars and Stripes. They were syndicated and were in many other local papers. And he always took the perspective not of the generals, not of the admirals, but of the regular guys who were fighting on the ground, as Nan was talking about, the people who make the difference between victory and defeat. In 1944, he won a Pulitzer Prize for his journalism. He also had turned some of these into books, some of these columns, and he was awarded for his coverage of, quote, ordinary American soldiers fighting a global conflict. Now, why do I mention Ernie Pyle? Am I just sort of losing it here, going off on a tangent? Well, probably. But beyond that, Ernie Pyle is on Okinawa, which we had just started to talk about last time, in March, April of 1945. And one of the last columns he ever wrote, he talked about the 1st Division's Navajo Code Talkers. So see, there is a point. It does wrap in. And I wanted to read you this a little bit. He wrote, nearly 2 years back, when I was with Oklahoma's 45th Division in Sicily. Now again, this wouldn't have been Navajo, as you pointed out, but it would have been Native American. And later in Italy, I learned they had a number of, he's mistaken, Navajo Indians, you explain that, in communications. When secret orders had to be given over the phone, these boys gave them to one another in Navajo. Practically nobody in the world understands Navajo except another Navajo. My regiment here had the same thing. There were about 8 Indians who did this special work. They were damn good Marines and very proud of it. And if you had it, I'd show you the slide of that. He went on to relate another story that which was that on the eve of Iwo Jima, I think there were 8 eve of Okinawa. I think there were 8 Navajo Code Talkers. They put on a ceremonial dance for their fellow servicemen, and in the ceremony they asked the gods to sap the strength of the Japanese in the assault in the battle that was to come. A little postscript to that, when the 1st Division met very heavy opposition, hellish opposition, in the south of Okinawa, one Marine turned to one of the Navajo Code Talkers and said, "Okay, Yazzie, what about your little ceremony? What do you call this?" "This is different," answered the Navajo Code Talker with a smile. We prayed only for an easy landing." I love that. And as long as we're talking about Ernie Pyle, Okinawa is also where his luck ran out. He was killed in action on Okinawa. He actually had been on Okinawa and then had gone to what's called whatever, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Shima, which is right next to Okinawa, in fact was used for a landing. What is that?
My dad was there.
Your dad was there, okay.
Yeah,
Well, Ernie Pyle was there too, and I have a picture, as you can see. Well, maybe we'll show it next time. That's really interesting because that is exactly where he was killed. He was in a Jeep with an American soldier, a Marine, when he was killed. And again, headlines around the world. I mean, Ernie Pyle being killed would be a banner headline in newspapers, not only throughout America, but even beyond. So again, very sad, but I also wanted to share. Again, I believe it's his last completed column was about the Coat Talkers. One more thing, and I think we'll be about out of time, is I try to commemorate people who have passed, and this is not a very pleasant story overall, but I think it's very interesting. And that is a man named David Dushman, D-U-S-H-M-A-N. He passed away this month, passed away on June the 4th, and he was 98 years old. During the Second World War, David Dushman was a major, not in our army, but in the Soviet Red Army. And he drove a tank. He had no idea, David Dushman had no idea what he was going to witness, the horrors he was going to witness, when as a 21-year-old major driving a tank on January 27th, 1945, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They had passed Krakow, Poland, and he was asked, they saw a German military installation that appeared to be largely abandoned, and he was asked to crash his tank through the barbed wire, create a pathway for the foot soldiers to follow. He did so, so they could get into this apparent, mostly abandoned German military camp. It was Auschwitz. Dushman, who besides being a Russian was also Jewish, therefore became, until he passed away on June 4th, a couple of weeks ago, he became the last surviving human being who was a direct eyewitness of the liberation of Auschwitz. What he saw that day, needless to say, would haunt him for the rest of his life. Skeletons everywhere, he said later. From the barracks they staggered, between the dead they sat and lay. Just terrible. He said that six years ago in an interview. The Germans, and it was indeed mostly abandoned, the Germans had cleared out of Auschwitz. They'd taken with them 60,000 prisoners, almost all Jewish. Again, not military, these were everyday civilian people on what became a death march. And they had left behind 7,000 who were too ill, too impaired, or too young to be able to walk. Now, again, you might say, why didn't these barbarians just, it's surprising they didn't kill them. Well, they would have, but they ran out of time. They realized that the Russians were getting close and they needed to leave. So they left, and again, 7,000 what David Dushman would call human skeletons were there for him to, he and his colleagues to personally witness. In their haste to leave Auschwitz, the Germans had also left behind other incriminating evidence. Remember, at Auschwitz, there were 1.1 million people murdered. 1.1 million people, none of whom, or virtually none of whom, ever wore a uniform. They were civilians, and most of them, almost all of them, were Jewish. Again, he would talk about it later. Up until the last 4 or 5 years, when age finally began to slow him down. David Dushman would give many speeches to various groups. He liked to especially speak to Eastern European and German audiences because he wanted to make sure they didn't forget and that they also didn't believe what they might read on the internet that the Holocaust never happened or some nonsense like that. So he was there, with his own eyes, he saw that they found a stack of men's suits, 370,000 men's suits, people who had been forced to disrobe and then were gassed to death, 837,000 women's garments, and sickening 7.7 tons of human hair, along with 600 bodies that they had not had time to burn. Over the decades since, again, this is 45, he's 21 years old, David Dushman would tell these stories, what he had seen with his own eyes over and over again. He only returned to Auschwitz one time, though. He was invited back many times, but he only went back once in the 1970s. And he said, I couldn't stop crying. I left, I was overwhelmed, couldn't stop crying. And now, David Dushman, the man who, the last eyewitness to that day of liberation, is gone. And again, I think we shouldn't let these people pass from our lives without acknowledging what they saw, what they did, and also what they tried to do after the war to make sure people did not forget. Now, how's that for an uplifting? I'm sorry, I just felt I had to share that. Okay, it is noontime. Let me just tell you where we're going, and then this will take about a minute, and then I'm going to say again how wonderful it is to see all of you. We have gone down in membership. Not everybody uses Zoom. I think we'll get some of those back. Also, some people have moved away to other cities or other states. Maybe some are sick of listening to me. It's always a remote possibility. So you can please encourage your friends and neighbors. We actually have room now to add new members. But just so you know, next month we had just begun to talk about the last campaign in the Pacific. And so we're going to pick up, I think maybe talked about it for we talked about it for a few minutes. But I'm going to pick up on Okinawa since it is the final battle of the Pacific. After this, what is left is Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the B-29s that continue to bomb Tokyo cities. But I'm going to then take us back to Europe because chronologically you just can't really go day by day and do justice to any one event or person. So I'm going to go back. We're going to talk about a little bit about the Battle of the Bulge, you mentioned. We're going to talk about the Yalta Conference, which occurred in February of 1945, the last time the Big Three met, Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill. We're going to talk about April the 12th, 1945. What happened on April the 12th, 1945? FDR dies of a cerebral hemorrhage. By the way, he dies right in the middle of Okinawa, right in the middle of the battle. Soldiers get word, and in those 88 days, they get word well before the outcome is known that their commander-in-chief is dead, and that Harry Truman is president, to which the reaction of most soldiers, what I have been able to read, was, who the hell is Harry Truman? And then we're going to talk about the Battle of Berlin, Hitler's suicide and VE Day. So those are the immediate upcoming events. We actually are getting to the end of World War II, which I promised to complete in less time than World War II. Any quick questions or comments before we call it a day?
Jim, I
Paul.
just have a couple of comments. Number one, thank you all for rejoining us.
Oh, yes.
Thank you for hanging in there with us through Zoom, which was a learning experience for all of us. We have had an exceptional meeting today with the outside presenters,
Yes.
which are continuing to
Outside
know
member
what is
presenters.
knowing each other. And it's practically a crescendo in musical terms for World War II. We continue to look for other presenters who may have
Yeah.
comparable stories to share or insights to contribute. So if you know anybody, contact myself, contact Jim, whoever.
Call the boss.
Yeah, call our producer. So, again, thank you very much for coming. We'll see you next month. And the cookie list is available for signing.
Exactly. Thank you for everybody who brought in today, I appreciate that. The other thing is, as we were going through this, I said, Jim's covered a lot of this in the Zoom meetings over the last 10 months, whatever. But this is Nan's presentation and Paul's, and is for those folks who did not, who are digitally challenged and do not like Zoom. Nan's presentation was a good wrap-up of what Jim was talking about. So if to some of you, it seemed to be repetitious, well, for more than half the people in this room, it was new. So Jim, thank you for that, and also Nan and Paul, thank you for that. It's really, really important, and I think it was a great way to get the new season, shall we say, and catch people up, and so that maybe we're on the same page now, at least partially. So I invite you to invite your friends. I don't know how well this recording is going to turn out. We're going to see. I'm going to put it on YouTube. So if those of you who are digitally challenged, if you ask your grandchildren how to do YouTube, that's also the source of where you find all the viral cat videos. So
And one more thing. I promise your father. I mean, when you think this man was on D-Day, he's on Normandy, and then the man is there for the entire Okinawa campaign. Two of the bloodiest, most awful, most terrifying moments of the entire war, clearly of the entire century, you could say. And he was there for both, and he survived both, came back to raise a family. I mean, how about applause for you? Thank you.
I gotta get those cats.
hi, Bob, how are you?
Well, I'm not too good.
Hi, how are you? I'm fine. Let me turn this baby off.